You've entered void of rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple: subscribe. We're almost at 6,000 corrupted souls, but the void hungers for more. Our goal is 10,000 subscribers before this year bleeds into darkness. Will you join our legion or face the consequences of defying the void? Now let's dive into today's story. I'm a Demon Inquisitor. For the Vatican, the rules are worse than hell. My name is Father Lucien Armand. 3 months ago, I was a simple historian studying early Christian texts in the Vatican Archives. Today, I'm something else entirely. Something the Vatican calls a Demon Inquisitor. If you're listening to this, I'm either dead or worse. I've become part of the tribunal itself. They gave me a codex bound in black leather that felt warm like living skin, sealed with what they claimed was the sanctified silver wire, drawn from crucifixes blessed by Pope Innocent XI himself. Inside were 37 rules written in blood-red ink that seemed to shift and writhe when I wasn't looking directly at the page. Rules that govern how we interrogate the damned. I thought hell would be the worst part of this job. I was wrong. The rules are designed to break you piece by piece, soul by soul, and they're working perfectly. Let me tell you how this began, how a respected scholar of medieval Christianity became something that no longer casts a shadow in direct sunlight. November 15th started like any other day in the Vatican's secret archives. The morning light filtered through ancient windows, casting long shadows across endless rows of manuscripts and bound volumes that held 1,000 years of church secrets. I was deep in Section 7, the restricted area that requires special papal permission to access. My research focused on the Inquisition of 1623, a particularly brutal period that most historians gloss over due to missing records and unexplained gaps in official documentation. I'd been searching for weeks, following paper trails and cross-references through dusty catalogues, when my fingers found something that shouldn't have existed. Hidden behind properly catalogued manuscripts, wedged into a space too narrow for proper storage, was a single volume bound in what felt disturbingly like human skin. The moment I touched it, the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs as I opened the cover, and I swear I could smell copper and myrrh rising from the pages. The manuscript spoke of a fourth tribunal, separate from the 3 known ecclesiastical courts of the Inquisition. This one wasn't for heretics or witches or political dissidents. This was for something else entirely. Beings captured during exorcisms, entities pulled from the bodies of the possessed and bound for questioning, demons given physical form and chain, interrogated for intelligence about hell's movements on earth. I laughed at first, that nervous chuckle scholars make when confronted with obvious medieval superstition, dressed up in official language. But as I read deeper, the details became too specific, too carefully documented. Names, dates, procedures. A bureaucracy of the supernatural that operated with the same methodical precision as any Vatican department, complete with forms, protocols, and efficiency reports. The parchment felt increasingly warm under my fingers, as if it had been sitting in direct sunlight for hours. But we were in a windowless basement, and it was nearly midnight. As I turned each page, I could swear I heard whispers in Latin, prayers spoken backwards, words that made my throat constrict, and my vision blur at the edges. One passage made my blood freeze, the 37th regulation of demonic interrogation, as established by Brother Matthias of Bologna in the year of our Lord, 1623. Should any scholar uncover these records without proper authorization, he shall be given one choice: join the sacred work of the tribunal, or have his memory of these matters cleansed permanently from his mind. The latter procedure has proven fatal in 7 of 10 attempts. I slammed the book shut and tried to convince myself it was an elaborate hoax. But when I opened it again, new text had appeared on the final page, written in fresh ink that was still wet. Father Lucien Marie Armand, born October 13th, 1985, in Lyon, France. Ordained June 21st, 2015. Specialist in early Christian heresies and Inquisition documentation. Current residence, Vatican City, apartment 7B, in the Pontifical North American College. You have read what was not meant for unauthorized eyes. Report to Cardinal Dequa tomorrow at sunrise or face the consequences of unsanctioned knowledge. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the manuscript. No one knew my middle name was Marie. I'd never used it officially, not even on my ordination papers. My apartment number wasn't listed in any directory I'd ever seen, and I'd never heard of Cardinal Dequa in 15 years of Vatican residence. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced my small apartment trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Elaborate prank by a fellow scholar. Psychological experiment by Vatican security. Ancient manuscript with temperature-sensitive ink that revealed new text when warmed by handling. But every explanation crumbled when I remembered the feeling of the parchment under my fingers. Too smooth, too warm, too alive. At exactly 5:45 in the morning, a sealed envelope appeared under my door. Heavy paper, the kind reserved for official Vatican correspondence. Inside, elegant handwriting in black ink that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Father Armand, Cardinal Dequa awaits your presence in the Apostolic Palace. Room 127B. Come alone. Tell no one of your destination. Bring the manuscript. Cardinal Augustin Dequa was not a man I'd heard of before, which was unusual in the small, gossipy world of Vatican hierarchy. When I arrived at the specified office, a room I'd walked past hundreds of times but never noticed, I found a pale man with eyes the colour of winter fog and hands that seemed too long for his arms. He stood behind an ornate desk carved with scenes from Dante's Inferno, each figure rendered in disturbing detail that seemed to move when observed peripherally. Father Armand, he said without looking up from his papers, his voice carrying a faint accent I couldn't place. You have uncovered something that was meant to remain hidden. Tell me, what did you make of Brother Matthias's journal? Brother Matthias. The name wasn't in any of my historical texts, but somehow I knew he meant the author of the manuscript. How Dequa knew what I'd found, I couldn't guess. The archives were supposed to be confidential, accessible only to authorized researchers. Medieval records about demon hunting, I replied carefully, setting the manuscript on his desk. Fascinating from a historical perspective, but hardly relevant to modern scholarship. Dequa finally looked up and I saw that his pupils were dilated despite the bright office lighting, black pools that seemed to reflect depths far greater than human eyes should contain. Modern scholarship, he repeated slowly, savouring each syllable. Father, what would you say if I told you that journal was written last Tuesday? My blood went cold. The parchment had been aged, weathered, written in archaic Latin with period-appropriate ink. The binding showed centuries of wear, unless... The Church has many enemies, Dequa continued, rising from his chair with fluid grace. Demons, cultists, heretics who seek to undermine God's kingdom on earth. For 400 years we have maintained a special department to combat these threats, a department that requires absolute secrecy and complete commitment from its members. He moved to a bookshelf that lined one wall, pulling out a volume that looked identical to the manuscript I'd found. You have two choices, Father Armand. Join us in our sacred work, or allow us to remove your memory of everything you've discovered. I should mention that the second option requires certain medical procedures that not everyone survives intact. The threat was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing lunch plans, but I could see the steel beneath his polite words. This wasn't really a choice at all. "What exactly would joining you entail?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come," Dequa said, moving toward a wooden panel in the wall that I hadn't noticed before. "Let me show you the true heart of the Vatican's mission." He pressed his palm against the panel, and it swung inward to reveal a narrow stone staircase that descended into darkness. The air that rose from below carried the scent of incense, candle wax, and something metallic that made my nose wrinkle. "The Sanctum Tribunal," Dequa announced as we began our descent, "has operated continuously since 1623. We are the Church's first and last line of defense against infernal incursion. Every demon captured during an authorized exorcism worldwide is brought here for questioning." The staircase spiraled down farther than should have been possible, past foundations that predated the current Vatican structures. The walls were carved with Latin prayers I couldn't translate, despite my fluency in 4 dead languages, and the stone itself seemed to absorb our footsteps rather than echo them. "How many people know about this?" I asked as we descended. "Fewer than 20 worldwide. The Pope, of course, 3 cardinals, including myself, a handful of specialized clergy, and our active interrogators, currently just 2, though we've had need of a 3rd for some time." The staircase ended at a heavy iron door marked with symbols that hurt my eyes to focus on. Dequa produced an ornate key from his robes and turned it in the lock. The sound echoed through the narrow corridor like a death knell, followed by the grinding of metal against stone. The Sanctum Tribunal existed 30 feet below the papal apartments, built over ancient Mithraic temples that predated Christianity in Rome by centuries. The main chamber was vast, with arched ceilings that disappeared into shadow above our heads. 13 cells lined the walls, each door made of iron that gleamed despite the humid air, blessed with holy water every dawn and dusk according to rituals dating back to the facility's founding. "Each cell contains a prisoner," Dequa explained as we walked the length of the chamber, our footsteps now echoing despite the stone construction. "Some have been here for centuries, others arrived last week. Time moves differently for their kind. Aging and decay follow different rules when dealing with entities that exist partially outside our reality." I could hear them now, the prisoners, whispers in languages that predated human speech, growls that seemed to emerge from the walls themselves, something that might have been sobbing if it came from human throats, but carried harmonics that no human voice could produce. From cell 7 came the sound of chains scraping against stone in rhythmic patterns that almost resembled music. Cell 12 echoed with what sounded like a child, singing lullabies, but the melody ran backwards and the words were in ancient Aramaic. "Your job," Dequa continued, stopping before a small iron table, set with various implements, "will be to extract information. Locations of cult gatherings, plans for large-scale possessions, the true names of their superiors in Hell's hierarchy, weaknesses in infernal defenses. You'll be given proper tools and training, of course, along with protective protocols that have kept our interrogators alive for 4 centuries. He handed me the black leather codex I mentioned earlier. Reguli Inquisitionis Inferni, Rules of the Infernal Inquisition. The cover was warm to the touch, and the silver wire binding seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. When I opened it, the pages fell to rule number 1 without my guidance, as if the book knew exactly what I needed to read. 37 rules, Dequa said, watching my face carefully. Follow them exactly, and you will survive your service with soul intact. Break them. He gestured to the margins of the open codex where I could see names scratched into the parchment, some in ink, others burned directly into the page, a few carved so deeply they'd torn through to the next sheet. "What happened to them?" I asked, running my finger over a name that had been scratched out so violently it had gouged the parchment. They became part of the tribunal permanently. Their souls now power the very mechanisms that keep our prisoners contained and our facility operational. Rule number 1 was written in that same blood-red ink. Never reveal your birth name to any prisoner. Demons use true names like keys to unlock and manipulate the human soul. Rule number 2 followed in slightly darker ink. Holy water must be sprinkled on your hands and feet before entering any cell. The water will burn and smoke if you are not in a proper state of grace. Rule number 3 made my throat tighten. Never touch the iron chains without blessed gloves. The metal remembers every evil it has bound, and will transfer that malevolence to any unprotected flesh. Rule number 4, each interrogation must begin with the recitation of Psalm 91 in Latin. Any other language will be corrupted and turned against the interrogator. Rule number 5, never answer a demon's question with silence. Silence is interpreted as consent to whatever they propose, granting them power over the interrogator's will. The rules continued, each more specific and disturbing than the last. Some seemed reasonable. Maintain respectful distance, never accept gifts. Always carry blessed items. Others made no immediate sense but were marked with warning symbols that suggested terrible consequences for violation. Rule number 15 made my hands shake as I read it. Should an Inquisitor break more than 3 rules in a single session, he forfeits his right to leave Vatican grounds alive. Departure attempts will result in immediate termination. Rule number 23. An Inquisitor must never close his eyes during a demon's confession. They speak truth only when witnessed, and blindness grants them power to plant false memories in place of genuine revelation. Rule number 31. The existence of the tribunal must never be revealed to anyone outside the organization, under penalty of immediate termination of life and soul. I need time to consider this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, while my mind raced through possibilities for escape. I'm afraid time is a luxury we don't have, Dequa replied, producing a scroll of parchment from his robes. Your signature on the oath or your memory of this place erased forever. Choose now, Father Armand. Some knowledge once gained cannot be unknown. The oath was written on parchment that felt disturbingly like skin under my fingers. Latin text in the same blood-red ink as the rulebook, arranged in patterns that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. At the bottom, a space for my signature marked with symbols that seemed to writhe and twist. I signed it with a pen that Dequa provided, but instead of ink, the instrument seemed to draw my own blood. My name appearing in crimson letters that dried to black as I watched. The moment I finished writing, I felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. A weight settling around my heart like an iron chain, cold and permanent. The candles throughout the chamber flared brighter, and I could swear I heard applause echoing from behind the 13 iron doors. "Welcome to the tribunal, Father Armand," Dequa said with what might have been a smile. "Your first assignment begins tomorrow at sunset. Tonight, study the rules. Memorize them. Your life, and more importantly, your soul depends on perfect adherence to each regulation." That night, I returned to my quarters and tried to research everything I could about demon inquisitions, exorcism procedures, anything that might help me understand what I'd gotten myself into. But every book I opened showed blank pages. Every computer search returned no results. Even my own research notes from years of academic work had vanished, leaving empty notebooks and clean hard drives. Worse, when I tried to call my sister in Lyon, the phone wouldn't connect. When I attempted to send an email to my former professor, the message bounced back with an error code I'd never seen. Recipient does not exist in authorized contact database. It was as if my entire life outside the Vatican had been erased. I spent the night reading and rereading the 37 rules. trying to memorize not just the words but the specific phrasing that might save my life. Some rules seemed to contradict others. Rule 16 said never to interrupt a prisoner mid-sentence, while Rule 21 demanded immediate response to any direct question. The margins contained notes in different handwriting, warnings, and clarifications that previous interrogators had added. Rule 7 applies only to cell 13. Learn this the hard way. PM. Never trust the thing in cell 9 when it offers information freely. Always a trap. AD. If the chains start glowing red, recite Psalm 23 immediately. Don't wait. MC. The next evening, Delacroix met me at the entrance to the tribunal. The heavy iron door seemed to recognize my approach, swinging open before either of us touched it. He handed me a leather satchel containing blessed gloves that smelled of frankincense, a vial of holy water that was warm to the touch, a silver crucifix on a chain that felt heavier than it should, and a small book of Latin prayers written in the same archaic style as the rules. "Your first prisoner is in cell 4, he said, his pale eyes reflecting the candlelight in ways that seemed wrong. "We call him the Venetian. He was captured in 1563 during the Council of Trent, pulled from the body of Cardinal Alessandro Farnese after a 3-year possession that nearly corrupted the entire proceedings. He claims to have information about the Marseille incidents of 1986. Cell 4's door bore the deepest cross-carving I'd seen yet. The metal scored so profoundly that I could see scratches where fingernails had clawed at the iron. When I turned the key, the sound of grinding metal filled the corridor, followed by a sulphurous smell that made my eyes water and my throat close. Inside, the chamber was carved from solid limestone, lit by torches that burned without smoke or heat. In the center sat a figure chained to a chair that looked like it had been hewn from a single massive stone. The restraints weren't just iron, they were meteoric iron, blessed and inscribed with prayers in a dozen dead languages. The creature was humanoid in basic shape, but wrong in every proportion that mattered. Too tall, with arms that reached nearly to the floor, and fingers that ended in points like iron nails. Its joints seemed to bend in directions that violated anatomy, and when it turned its head to look at me, I heard vertebrae crack like breaking wood. Its skin was the colour of old parchment, stretched tight over bones that seemed too large for the flesh containing them. "Ah," it said in a voice like grinding glass mixed with honey. A new voice in these ancient halls. "Tell me, priest, what year claims dominion over the world above?" Rule number 5 echoed in my mind. Never answer a demon's question with silence. Silence is interpreted as consent to whatever they propose. 2025, I replied, my voice barely steady, despite my efforts. "I'm here to ask about the Marseille incidents." "Marseille," the Venetian mused, its 2 long fingers drumming against the stone armrest in patterns that seemed almost musical. "Yes, our children danced in the Cathedral of Notre Dame de la Garde. Beautiful work, if I do say so myself. 17 priests, 3 nuns, and Bishop Laurent himself, all moving to music only they could hear. The blood on the altar spelled out prayers in ancient Aramaic, prayers that opened doorways better left sealed. I pulled out my notebook, hands trembling as I began to write, but as I focused on the page, I realized I was unconsciously writing the same prayer over and over. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The words appeared in my handwriting, but I had no memory of forming the letters. "The local authorities called it a mass psychotic break," the Venetian continued, watching my confusion with obvious amusement. "Gas leak in the cathedral basement, they said. Shared hallucination brought on by carbon monoxide poisoning. Clever cover story, really. Much more palatable than admitting that demons had turned consecrated ground into a summoning circle." "What were they trying to summon?" I asked, then immediately regretted the question as the creature's smile widened, revealing teeth like broken glass. "You smell of uncertainty, priest. it said, leaning forward as far as the chains would allow. "You don't believe what you're seeing. That's refreshing. Most of your predecessors came in here full of righteous fury and holy fire, convinced of their moral superiority. You're just terrified. Much more honest." That's when it told me something that changed everything. Leaning forward until the meteoric iron began to smoke against its flesh, it whispered, "You think this place contains us, but you're wrong. We feed it. Every confession, every secret torn from our lips, every truth we're forced to speak, it all goes into the machine." "What machine?" I asked before I could stop myself, breaking rule number 12. Never ask follow-up questions that weren't part of your original interrogation outline. "The one beneath St. Peter's Basilica, of course, the summoning engine. Your precious church didn't build this place to imprison hell's soldiers. Priest. They built it to harvest us. Every word we speak here is collected, processed, and fed into a mechanism designed to accumulate enough infernal knowledge to summon and bind an archdemon of immense power." The Venetian's eyes, black as midnight water, fixed on mine with an intensity that made my vision blur. "Every rule in your little book serves the same purpose. Follow them, and you help extract the confessions that power one component of the engine. Break them, and you gradually separate your soul from your body, making it easier to harvest when the time comes." I felt something cold crawl up my spine like an ice-covered serpent. "What do you mean?" "The names in your codex margins. Those aren't former inquisitors who died, priest. They're former inquisitors who were absorbed. Their souls power the very chains that bind us, the crosses that burn our flesh, the holy water that sears our throats. This place runs on human sacrifice disguised as divine justice." The creature's laugh was like crystal breaking in a thunderstorm. Brother Matthias was brilliant, in his way. He realized that fighting evil requires understanding evil, and understanding evil requires communion with evil. So he built a system where the church could harvest demonic knowledge while slowly corrupting the souls of those doing the harvesting. Perfect efficiency. I finished the interrogation according to protocol, but my hands shook so badly I could barely write. The Venetian had given me detailed information about demon cult activities across Europe, but every revelation felt like poison entering my mind. As I prepared to leave, it called out one last time. "You'll be back, priest. They always come back. And each time you'll break a little more. The rules aren't meant to protect you. They're meant to break you slowly, methodically, so your soul maintains its potency when they finally harvest it for fuel." I broke rule number 11 that day. Never show fear to a prisoner. It saw the terror in my eyes and laughed. A sound like breaking glass that followed me all the way back to my quarters and echoed in my dreams for hours afterward. Over the following weeks, I interrogated 7 more prisoners, each more disturbing than the last. The thing in cell 2 claimed to be Marquis Andromalius, a Duke of Hell responsible for coordinating possessions across the European continent. It spoke in perfect medieval French about planned infestations of monasteries and convents, describing rituals that would turn places of worship into gateways for lesser demons. The entity in cell 8 appeared as a young girl, no more than 12 years old, but spoke in a voice like grinding millstones. It recited the true names of 47 demons, currently operating in mortal guise throughout major world cities, along with their specific assignments and weaknesses. The information was invaluable, but listening to those hellish names, pronounced by a child's voice, left me nauseous for days. Cell 5 contained something that had once been human, a 15th century monk who'd attempted to bind a demon to his own soul and been consumed in the process. It retained fragments of human memory, mixed with infernal knowledge, creating a creature that could provide detailed intelligence about both sides of the eternal war. But its confessions came mixed with screams of agony as its human remnants fought against the demonic corruption that had overtaken it. Each session lasted hours, and each time I left feeling more hollow, more disconnected from myself and from God. The prisoners seemed to know exactly which revelations would cause me the most spiritual damage, guiding our conversations toward topics that forced me to hear descriptions of horrors no human mind should contain. The rules were impossibly specific and easy to break without realizing it. Rule number 17. Never step on the iron grating in the center of cell 5. The metal had been blessed by 7 different popes and would burn through shoe leather and flesh if touched by someone who had committed any sin since their last confession. I learned that one the hard way when I shifted my weight during a particularly long interrogation, spending 3 days limping on a burned foot that left scars in the shape of a cross. Rule number 21. If a prisoner offers you food or drink, you must refuse 3 times before accepting, and you must accept before they offer a 4th time. Accept before the 3rd refusal, and you'll never stop hungering for demonic nourishment. Refuse after the 4th offer, and the prisoner gains power over your dreams and waking thoughts. Rule number 26. Never write down the true name of any prisoner using ink that has been blessed. The holy ink will catch fire when used to inscribe infernal designations, potentially destroying valuable intelligence. But never use unblessed ink either, as demonic names written in ordinary materials give the entities power over the writing implement, the paper, and eventually the hand that wrote them. Rule number 29. If a prisoner begins speaking in tongues, you must determine within 30 seconds whether they're channeling angelic or demonic languages. Angelic tongues require immediate transcription and translation. Demonic tongues must be silenced immediately, or they will corrupt any recording equipment and gradually influence anyone who hears them. Each broken rule brought consequences that compounded over time. After my 2nd week, I'd violated 8 rules through various small infractions. Looking away during testimony, when the descriptions became too graphic, touching blessed metal without proper protection when my hands were shaking, speaking my father's name aloud when asked about my family background. The punishment started subtly but grew more severe with each violation. Black stains appeared under my fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could remove. They seemed to seep up from beneath the nail bed, like oil rising through porous stone. Psalms I'd memorized since childhood began fading from my memory like someone was erasing them, word by word, with acid. My reflection in mirrors started appearing a split second after I looked, as if my image had to catch up to my physical presence. More disturbing were the changes in my daily routine. Holy water began to steam when I touched it, the vapor carrying a sulphurous smell that made other priests wrinkle their noses. During Mass, I found myself unconsciously humming harmonies that turned sacred hymns into something discordant and wrong. My handwriting changed, becoming more angular and aggressive, with letters that seemed to slice into the paper rather than rest on its surface. But the worst consequence was the dreams. Every night I found myself back in the tribunal, walking the corridor between the 13 cells. But in the dreams, all the doors were open, and the prisoners sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle, watching me with expectant smiles. In the center of their circle was another chair, empty, waiting with my name carved into the wooden back. "Soon," they would whisper in unison, their voices creating harmonies that human throats couldn't produce. "Soon you'll understand your true purpose here." I'd wake up screaming, clutching my rosary so tightly the beads left marks on my palms. But the rosary itself was changing, the silver tarnishing despite daily polishing, and the crucifix at the end had developed hairline cracks that spread a little more each day. Worse, the prayers I'd attached to each bead were being replaced in my memory with words in languages I didn't recognize, ancient tongues that hurt my throat to speak and left the taste of copper on my tongue. By my 4th week, I understood why previous inquisitors had names scratched into the codex margins. This wasn't a job. It was a slow-motion spiritual execution designed to gradually separate soul from body while maintaining enough coherence to continue functioning as an interrogator. Each rule broken weakened the barriers between my soul and something hungry that waited in the darkness beneath Vatican City. The changes accelerated after I broke rule number 19. If a prisoner bleeds during interrogation, the blood must not touch the interrogator's skin. Demonic blood carries their essence and will gradually transform any mortal it contacts. The violation happened during my session with Cell 9's occupant, a creature that appeared as a Renaissance-era cardinal, but whose crimson robes were actually its own flayed skin, grown into fabric. During questioning about corruption within the Medici banking system, it deliberately bit its own tongue, spraying black blood across the small table between us. 3 drops landed on my unprotected wrist before I could react. The pain was immediate and excruciating, like acid eating through flesh and bone. But worse than the physical agony was the sensation of something foreign entering my bloodstream, flowing through my veins like liquid ice. Within hours, I could hear whispers at the edge of my perception. Not my own thoughts, but someone else's memories bleeding into my mind. That night, I dreamed I was the creature in Cell 9, experiencing its memories of corrupting papal banking systems in the 16th century. I felt its satisfaction at turning God's treasury into a mechanism for funding wars and enriching enemies of the church. I remembered, with perfect clarity, the names and faces of cardinals who'd been bribed, bishops who'd been blackmailed, and abbots who'd willingly sold their souls for temporal power. When I woke, I retained all of that knowledge. I knew details about Vatican financial corruption that had been classified for centuries. Worse, I found myself appreciating the elegance of the demonic plan, admiring the sophistication of their long-term strategy. For the first time since joining the tribunal, I felt something other than fear and revulsion toward our prisoners. I was beginning to understand them. Delacroix noticed the change immediately. "You're progressing faster than most," he said during one of our brief weekly meetings. "The integration of infernal knowledge typically takes months to achieve such depth. Your academic background seems to be facilitating the process." "Integration?" I asked, though part of me already knew what he meant. The absorption of demonic intelligence into human cognitive frameworks. It's necessary for advanced interrogation techniques. You can't extract complex information from entities you don't understand at a fundamental level. Most interrogators require extensive conditioning to reach your current state. He consulted a ledger bound in the same black leather as my codex. "You've broken 12 rules so far, with consequences progressing normally. We should have you ready for advanced assignments within the month." "Ready for what?" "Cell 13, the prisoner we call Kebrel. He's been here since the tribunal's founding, and his knowledge encompasses the entire scope of Hell's operations on Earth. But he only speaks to interrogators who've reached a certain level of compatibility with infernal thought patterns." That night I tried to pray, but the words came out in the ancient tongue I'd absorbed from the creature in Cell 9. When I attempted to recite the Lord's Prayer, it emerged as a hymn of praise to something called the Lightbringer. My crucifix grew hot against my chest until I had to remove it, the silver leaving burn marks on my skin in the shape of an inverted cross. Rule number 24 fell the next week. Never allow a prisoner to see you outside their cell. If a bound demon observes an inquisitor in the natural world, they gain power over that inquisitor's daily life. The violation happened by accident when I took a different route back to my quarters after a particularly exhausting session. My path led past the small barred window of Cell 2, and the creature inside, the one claiming to be Marquis Andromalius, smiled and waved when it saw me. That night, every door in my apartment opened and closed, randomly, throughout the hours of darkness. Every faucet turned itself on and off. Every light fixture flickered in patterns that spelled out messages in Morse code: soon, soon, soon. Rule number 28 fell 2 days later when desperation drove me to ask the forbidden question. Never ask a demon about your own future. The answers they give become binding prophecy that shapes reality according to infernal will. I posed the question to the Venetian during our second session. What happens to me? Its smile could have cut glass. You feed the god beneath the stones, priest. Your soul becomes fuel for a fire that will burn both heaven and hell, reshaping existence according to one man's vision of perfect order. You will scream for exactly 47 minutes as your essence is extracted, and then you will become part of something magnificent and terrible. The moment those words left its lips, I felt them settle into my bones like chains. Not just information, but destiny. The future had been spoken into existence by an entity whose words carried the weight of cosmic law. Rule number 33 fell when I couldn't contain the horror any longer. Never speak to anyone about the specific content of interrogations. Each word shared with an unauthorized person grants the demons additional influence over the mortal realm. I approached Father Benedict, an elderly priest who'd been my mentor since my arrival at the Vatican, and began to tell him about the tribunal, but the words that came out of my mouth weren't my own. Instead, I found myself reciting detailed instructions for summoning a lesser demon named Baelberith, complete with the required sacrificial materials and incantations that would thin the barriers between worlds. Father Benedict's eyes rolled back in his head as the words hit him, and he began to convulse. By the time I managed to stop talking, my mouth moving independently of my will, he was speaking fluent Aramaic and drawing occult symbols on the chapel floor with his own blood. The Vatican medical staff found him 3 hours later, catatonic but still carving increasingly complex geometric patterns into the marble with his fingernails. The official report blamed a sudden stroke combined with a rare neurological condition that caused compulsive behaviors. Father Benedict was transferred to a private medical facility where he remains under sedation, his room warded with symbols that would make any Catholic theologian weep. I was questioned briefly about our conversation, but my memory of the event had been selectively edited. I remembered talking to him about my research, but couldn't recall the specific words I'd spoken. Only 5 rules remained unbroken, and I could feel the weight of them pressing down on my soul like stones. Each day, I found it harder to remember why I'd ever wanted to escape this place. The work was important, wasn't it? Hell needed to be fought with intelligence and cunning, not just prayers and holy water. The demons we interrogated provided valuable information that prevented possessions, exposed cults, and saved innocent lives. The fact that this work was slowly consuming my soul seemed like a reasonable price to pay for the greater good. Delacroix summoned me for my final assignment on a Monday evening when the Vatican bells were ringing vespers. The sound that had once brought me comfort now seemed discordant, each toll echoing through my skull like hammer blows against an anvil. "Cell 13 awaits," he said simply, handing me a new set of blessed gloves, made from leather, taken from lambs sacrificed on Easter Sunday. "Kebrel has been asking for you specifically. That's unusual. In 4 centuries, he's never requested a particular interrogator." Rule number 9, written in darker ink than the rest. No inquisitor may ever leave Vatican grounds after hearing Kebrel speak. The words of this prisoner bind the listener to the tribunal until death or absorption into the mechanism. Rule number 37, the final rule, written in what looked like dried blood. Should Kebrel be interrogated, the session must last until sunrise. Early termination results in immediate forfeiture of the Inquisitor's soul to the summoning engine. What makes him different from the others? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would change everything. Kebrel isn't just a prisoner, Delacroix replied, his pale eyes reflecting candlelight in ways that seem to violate the laws of optics. He's a partner, the co-founder of the tribunal itself. Without his cooperation, none of this would be possible. The walk to cell 13 felt longer than usual, though the corridor hadn't changed. Each step echoed with the weight of inevitability, and I could feel the other prisoners stirring in their cells as I passed. They knew what was coming. They'd been waiting for this moment since my first day in the tribunal. Cell 13's door was different from the others. Where the other doors bore single crosses carved deep into the iron, this one was covered in symbols from a dozen different faiths: Christian crosses, Jewish stars, Islamic crescents, Hindu symbols, Buddhist dharma wheels, and others I didn't recognize. The metal itself seemed to shimmer, as if the door existed partially in our reality and partially somewhere else. When I turned the key, the lock didn't just click, it sang, a high, crystalline note that resonated through the stone and into my bones. Every symbol on the door flared with light for a brief moment, and I felt a sensation like stepping through a membrane into a different kind of space entirely. Cell 13 was circular, carved with such impossible precision that it looked more like a cathedral than a prison. The walls rose up into shadows that seemed deeper than the physical space should allow, covered floor to ceiling with Latin text that moved when I wasn't looking directly at it. The words weren't carved into the stone. They appeared to be growing from it, like living script that rearranged itself, according to some incomprehensible purpose. In the center, instead of a simple stone chair, sat an ornate throne carved from what looked like black obsidian. The material reflected no light, despite the torches burning around the chamber's perimeter, and its surface was carved with scenes that seemed to depict the fall of angels, but from the demon's perspective, showing their rebellion as a noble struggle against tyranny. And on the throne sat Kebrel. He appeared as an elderly monk, hands folded peacefully in his lap, wearing robes that might once have been brown, but had faded to the colour of dried blood. His face was kind, grandfatherly, with laugh lines around eyes that held depths of ancient wisdom. No chains bound him, no restraints held him to the throne. He simply sat there, patient as a mountain, waiting for me to speak. "Father Armand," he said without looking up, his voice carrying the accumulated weight of centuries. "I've been expecting you for quite some time. Please sit. We have until sunrise, and there is much you need to understand before your transformation is complete." His voice didn't echo like the others. It seemed to come from inside my own head, as if I were speaking the words myself. When he finally raised his eyes to meet mine, I saw they were completely human, warm brown, filled with genuine kindness, and what looked like sympathy for my situation. Against every instinct, I moved to the simple wooden chair that had appeared beside his throne. The seat was warm, as if someone had been sitting in it moments before I arrived, and I noticed that my shadow fell across his feet, despite the positioning of the torches. "You want to know about the tribunal's true purpose," Kebrel continued, and it wasn't a question. Somehow he knew exactly what I'd been wondering, what had been eating at me since my first interrogation. About the summoning engine beneath St. Peter's Basilica, about why the rules in your codex are designed to break rather than protect the souls of those who follow them. I'd never asked him anything, but somehow he knew. "The summoning engine," he said, the words rolling off his tongue like a prayer, "is the Catholic Church's greatest secret and greatest sin. Built in 1623 by Brother Matthias of Bologna, a monk who made a bargain with powers that predate both heaven and hell." Kebrel stood from his throne with fluid grace, and I noticed that his feet touched the ground normally, unlike the other prisoners, who seemed to exist partially outside physical reality. He moved to the wall, running his fingers over the moving Latin text with obvious affection. "Matthias was brilliant but impatient," Kebrel continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone recounting a cherished memory. He saw the church struggling against the forces of darkness, losing ground every year to possession, to cults, to the growing influence of demonic entities in the mortal world. Exorcisms were crude, temporary solutions. Cast out one demon, and 3 more would take its place within a month. The text on the walls began to glow brighter as Kebrel spoke, and I could see that it wasn't just writing, it was a 3-dimensional diagram, a schematic of something vast and complex buried deep beneath the Vatican. The words rearranged themselves into architectural plans, showing chambers, conduits, and mechanical components that seemed to merge spiritual engineering with impossible geometry. So, Matthias proposed a revolutionary solution, Kebrel said, tracing patterns in the air that the wall text immediately began to mirror. Instead of simply casting out evil, why not harness it? Why not build a system that could extract intelligence from captured demons, accumulate their knowledge of hell's operations, and use that information to fight darkness with darkness? I found myself leaning forward, fascinated despite my growing horror. The logic was seductive in its simplicity. But the church's leadership wasn't ready for such radical thinking, Kebrel continued. They saw it as consorting with evil, as compromising the purity of God's mission. So Matthias came to me. "You were already imprisoned here?" I asked. Kebrel's laugh was warm, entirely human, and somehow the most terrifying sound I'd ever heard. "Imprisoned? Oh, my dear Father Armand, I was never imprisoned here. I'm a co-founder of this facility, a willing partner in the greatest theological experiment in human history." He returned to his throne, settling into it with the easy comfort of someone who'd occupied that seat for centuries. I'm what you might call a reformed demon, an entity that grew tired of hell's endless bureaucracy and decided to explore more creative opportunities for influence in the mortal realm. The revelation hit me like ice water in my veins. You're not a prisoner. I am an architect. Matthias provided the vision and the theological framework. I provided the technical expertise in spiritual engineering and the connections necessary to acquire our initial collection of test subjects. Together, we built something that has been harvesting both demonic knowledge and human souls for 400 years. Kebrel gestured around the luxurious cell that I now realized was actually a private office. Every confession extracted in these chambers feeds into the engine. Every rule broken by an interrogator weakens the barriers between their soul and body, making eventual extraction easier and more efficient. The strong ones last year's providing excellent service while gradually preparing themselves for harvest. The weak ones barely make it through their first month, but even they contribute useful energy to the system. "How many?" I whispered. "Inquisitors, nearly 300 over the centuries. Each one convinced they were serving God while actually feeding a mechanism designed to accumulate enough power to summon and permanently bind an archdemon of immense capability. With such an entity under church control, the Vatican could reshape both heaven and earth according to papal will." The walls around us pulsed with that strange red light, and I could now clearly hear what I'd been sensing for weeks. Machinery humming somewhere far below, a sound like the heartbeat of something immense and hungry. The summoning engine, working constantly to process the spiritual energy that flowed down from the tribunal above. "The final summoning requires one more component," Kebrel explained, his voice taking on the tone of a professor delivering a crucial lecture. "The willing sacrifice of an inquisitor who has broken all 37 rules while retaining enough coherent soul structure to make the offering meaningful. Brother Matthias calculated it would take centuries to find such a person, someone intelligent enough to understand what's happening, strong enough to last through all the rule-breaking, and fundamentally moral enough that their soul's corruption would provide the exact spiritual resonance the engine requires." He looked at me with those kind brown eyes, and I saw genuine affection there. The warmth of a teacher proud of his students' progress. Here you are, Father Armand. 34 rules broken and counting. Just 3 more violations, and you'll be ready to complete the work that Matthias and I began 4 centuries ago. What if I refuse? I asked, though I could already feel the futility of the question. Refuse? Kebrel tilted his head with curiosity. My dear boy, you signed the oath in your own blood. The binding is absolute. You cannot refuse, cannot flee, cannot even end your own life. The only path forward is through the remaining rules, breaking them one by one until you're spiritually prepared for the final harvest. He leaned forward in his throne, his expression shifting to one of genuine concern. But I can offer you a choice in how that process unfolds. You could continue fighting, resisting the inevitable, while causing yourself tremendous suffering. Your predecessor, Father Giovanni, chose that path. He lasted 8 months, breaking rules accidentally, through desperate attempts to maintain his humanity. The process was unpleasant for him. What's the alternative? Embrace your role willingly. Stop fighting the rules, stop trying to preserve a humanity that's already largely gone, and let the transformation happen quickly and cleanly. Many of your predecessors found great peace in surrender. Their final months were spent in comfortable acceptance of their cosmic purpose. I spent the remaining hours until sunrise listening to Kebrel describe the true history of the tribunal in loving detail. How it had operated for 4 centuries, harvesting dozens of inquisitors and hundreds of demons to power a machine designed to reshape the fundamental laws of spiritual reality. How each captured demon had contributed specific knowledge, military strategies, political intelligence, theological secrets, to a vast database of infernal information that would soon be used to wage war against heaven itself. The church you serve believes it fights for God, Kebrel explained as the first rays of sunlight began to filter through windows I couldn't see. But God, in his infinite wisdom, sometimes requires his servants to make difficult choices. Abraham was willing to sacrifice Isaac. The church must be willing to sacrifice a few hundred souls to gain the power necessary to eliminate evil permanently from creation. And you believe this justifies everything? I believe in the beauty of ambitious design, Kebrel replied. For millennia, the conflict between good and evil has been a stalemate. Hell corrupts some humans, heaven saves others. The cycle repeats endlessly. Matthias envisioned breaking that cycle, giving righteousness the tools it needs to achieve permanent victory. Sometimes the greatest good requires methods that appear evil to those with limited perspective. Dawn broke, and I was free to leave cell 13. But as I walked back through the corridor, I could feel Kebrel's presence following me, like a warm shadow. His final words echoed in my mind. 3 rules remain, Father Armand. When you're ready to complete your magnificent purpose, simply return to me. I'll be waiting. I returned to my quarters as the sun rose over Vatican City, but something fundamental had shifted during the night. My shadow no longer moved in sync with my body. It lagged several steps behind, and sometimes it gestured independently, pointing back towards the tribunal entrance with obvious eagerness. Over the next week, I tried to maintain some semblance of normal routine, but the pretense was becoming impossible. I attended morning mass, but the Latin prayers came out backwards, without my conscious intent. I took meals with other priests, but found myself unconsciously humming melodies that turned their conversation into discordant harmony. I even attempted to return to my historical research, but every text I opened showed the same content. Detailed schematics of the summoning engine and instructions for its final activation. The other clergy began to avoid me. Not obviously, but I noticed the subtle signs, conversations that stopped when I approached, invitations that weren't extended, glances that lingered too long on my hands where the black stains under my fingernails had begun to spread up my fingers like ink through water. Dequa summoned me daily for new interrogations, and each session broke more rules with increasing inevitability. The prisoners seemed to know exactly which infractions would cause me the most spiritual damage, guiding our conversations toward topics that forced me to violate one regulation after another. Rule number 35 fell when I tried to enter St. Peter's Basilica for morning mass. An inquisitor who has broken more than 20 rules may not enter the most consecrated ground. The holy earth will reject his presence and cast him into the spaces between worlds. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the marble floor beneath me cracked like thin ice, and I found myself falling through solid stone into a grey void that smelled of sulphur and despair. The space between spaces where reality became negotiable and the laws of physics bent to accommodate impossible geometries. Only the intervention of Dequa's assistants, who arrived with suspicious speed, as if they'd been waiting for this exact event, pulled me back to the physical world. Rule number 27 broke during my interrogation of Cell 6 occupant: never allow a prisoner to touch you, even briefly. Physical contact creates a spiritual link that grants the entity access to the interrogator's memories and emotional state. It happened during a moment of carelessness when I leaned too close to the creature, something that appeared as a medieval abbess, but whose skin writhed with barely visible serpents beneath the surface. Its fingertip brushed my wrist for less than a second, but the contact burned like acid and sent images flooding through my mind. I saw myself as the demon saw me, not a righteous servant of God, but a willing participant in cosmic blasphemy. I felt its satisfaction at my corruption, its anticipation of the power my eventual sacrifice would provide. Most disturbing, I experienced its genuine affection for me, the way a gardener might feel toward a particularly promising plant that was finally ready for harvest. By my 8th week, I'd broken 36 of the 37 rules. My reflection had vanished entirely from mirrors, replaced by empty silvered glass that showed only the room behind me. The rosary I'd carried since ordination had crumbled to ash in my pocket, leaving stains that looked like tiny crosses. When I tried to pray, the words came out in languages that hurt my throat to speak, and left the taste of copper and sulphur on my tongue. The dreams had evolved beyond simple visions. Now I found myself actually conducting interrogations during sleep, questioning prisoners who weren't physically present in the tribunal, but existed in some parallel space accessible only to those whose souls had been sufficiently prepared. I'd wake up with detailed notes written in my own handwriting, describing conversations I'd never had with demons, whose names weren't recorded in any official files. "You're progressing beautifully," Dequa told me during our final weekly meeting, "faster than anyone in the tribunal's history. The engine's power levels have increased dramatically since you began your service, and the spiritual resonance patterns suggest we're approaching the critical threshold for final activation." "How many more?" I asked, my voice coming out as barely a whisper. "Just one rule remains," he said, consulting his leather-bound ledger. "Rule number 36. Once that's broken, the harvest can begin, and Brother Matthias's grand design will finally reach completion." Rule number 36. Never attempt to destroy the codex or any component of the tribunal. Such actions result in immediate absorption of the offender's soul into the summoning engine. That was the trap, I realized with crystal clarity. The only way to escape would be to destroy the oath I'd signed, or the rulebook itself, but doing so would immediately trigger the very fate I was trying to avoid. A perfect, logical prison. Follow the rules and gradually lose your soul through systematic corruption, or break the final rule and lose it instantly through direct absorption. But there was a third option, one that Kebrel had hinted at but never explicitly stated. I could choose the timing of my sacrifice. Rather than breaking Rule 36 accidentally through desperation, I could violate it deliberately, willingly, on my own terms. That realization brought an unexpected sense of peace. For weeks I'd felt like a victim of forces beyond my control, but choice, even the choice of when to surrender, was still a form of power. I lasted another 3 days before making my decision. On Thursday evening, as the Vatican bells were ringing Compline, I returned to my quarters and began recording this account. Every word I speak violates Rule 33, a little more, spreading demonic influence into the world through anyone who hears my story. But more importantly, I'm preparing to break Rule number 36 by attempting to destroy the codex that binds me. I know it won't save me. I know the moment I touch flame to the leather binding, my soul will be pulled into the summoning engine beneath St. Peter's Basilica, providing the final component needed for Brother Matthias's grand summoning. But at least this recording might warn others about what lurks beneath Vatican City. The machine is almost ready. 4 centuries of harvested souls, hundreds of demons bled dry of their secrets, and dozens of inquisitors like me who thought they were serving God while feeding something far older and hungrier. Soon the Catholic Church will have an archdemon powerful enough to remake reality according to their vision of perfect divine order. But here's what Kebrel didn't tell me, what I've figured out during these final days of clarity before absorption. The archdemon they're summoning isn't going to be their servant. Entities of that power don't serve, they rule. Brother Matthias thought he was building a weapon for the Church to wield against hell. In reality, he was building a gateway for hell to take control of the Church. The beautiful irony is that I'm going to help them complete their work, knowing full well that it will destroy everything they think they're fighting to preserve. Sometimes the greatest service to God requires methods that appear evil to those with limited perspective. Isn't that what Kebrel said? They're coming for me now. I can hear Cardinal Dequa and his assistants in the corridor outside my door, along with footsteps that don't sound entirely human anymore. My shadow has detached itself completely from my body and stands beside my desk, pointing eagerly toward the drawer where I keep the codex. Through my window, I can see lights flickering in patterns across Vatican City. Not electrical failures, but spiritual responses to the energy building beneath St. Peter's Basilica. The summoning engine is preparing for its final meal, and every blessed object within a mile radius is beginning to resonate with anticipation. If you find this recording, stay away from the Vatican Archives. Don't research the Inquisition of 1623. Don't look for manuscripts about tribunal procedures or demon interrogation. And whatever you do, never sign an oath written in Latin if you can't translate every single word yourself. The Church has been playing a 400-year game with heaven and hell, and they're about to discover that they've been pawns rather than players all along. Father Armand, came Dequa's voice through the door. Patient but insistent. It's time to complete your service to the Church. Kebrel is waiting for you in cell 13. I can see through the keyhole that he's not alone. Behind him stand 12 figures in black robes, and their faces aren't entirely human anymore. Stretched and elongated, with eyes that reflect red light. Former Inquisitors, I realize, who've progressed beyond the point of being harvested for fuel. They've become something else, servants of the engine who help maintain its operations and guide new recruits through their final transformations. My shadow is pulling at my arm now, trying to drag me towards the codex. It knows that breaking the final rule will complete my preparation, make me ready for the harvest that will power Brother Matthias's ultimate summoning. But I have one last choice to make, one final act of defiance. I'm going to break Rule 36 willingly, gladly, with full knowledge of what it will accomplish. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. Because sometimes serving God requires destroying the institutions that claim to speak for him. The door is opening. I can see Dequa's pale face, his satisfied smile, the way his eyes reflect depth that no human gaze should contain. Behind him, the 12 robed figures begin to chant in Latin, words that make the air itself thicken and writhe with anticipation. Never sign an oath written in Latin if you can't read every single word. Never trust a church that builds its holiest site over a machine designed to challenge heaven itself. And never, ever believe that following the rules will keep you safe when the rules themselves are designed to damn you. I'm reaching for the codex now. The black leather is warm under my fingers, pulsing with its own heartbeat. The silver wire binding glows red hot, eager to complete the circuit that will drain my soul into the hungry mechanisms below. But as I touch flame to the ancient parchment, I want you to remember this. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is to destroy the faith of others. Sometimes serving the light requires embracing the darkness. And sometimes the only way to save the world is to damn yourself willingly, completely, with eyes wide open. The binding is catching fire. I can feel my soul beginning to separate from my body, flowing like liquid light toward the depths beneath Vatican City. The summoning engine roars to life with a sound like breaking reality, and through the floor I can feel something immense stirring in response to my sacrifice. The Catholic Church wanted to control a demon powerful enough to remake creation. Instead, they're about to learn that some powers can never be controlled, only unleashed. May God forgive us all for what we've done. May God forgive me for what I'm about to become. The recording ends here, in a burst of static found sealed in a lead-lined box hidden behind a false wall in Father Lucien Armand's former quarters. The Vatican's official records show he suffered a complete mental breakdown on December 12, 2025, and was transferred to a private psychiatric facility in Switzerland. However, no such facility has any record of his admission, and Swiss authorities have no documentation of his entry into the country. Cardinal Lucien Dequa was quietly reassigned to administrative duties in the Vatican Library, following an internal investigation into allegations of conducting unauthorized theological research. When questioned about Father Armand's whereabouts, the Cardinal simply states that some servants of the Church work in capacities that require absolute discretion, and that Father Armand's contributions to ecclesiastical scholarship continue to this day in ways that cannot be publicly acknowledged. The Apostolic Palace basement levels remain officially designated for storage of historical artifacts and are not accessible to regular Vatican tours. Maintenance workers report occasional sounds from the sub-basement levels, rhythmic humming, chanting in unknown languages and what sounds like machinery operating at frequencies that make their teeth ache and their vision blur. Construction crews working on foundation repairs beneath St. Peter's Basilica in early 2025 reported discovering a vast chamber filled with machinery of unknown purpose constructed from materials that didn't match any records of Vatican construction projects. The chamber was subsequently sealed under direct papal order, with all workers sworn to absolute secrecy regarding their discoveries. 3 of those workers have since been admitted to psychiatric facilities after claiming they could hear voices calling their names from beneath the Vatican's foundations. Cardinal Dequa's administrative records show continued recruitment efforts for specialized theological research positions, with preference given to historians with expertise in medieval church practices and fluency in classical languages. Interested candidates are advised that certain positions require lifelong commitment to discretion and may involve extended residence within Vatican City under circumstances that preclude outside contact. Recent reports from Vatican City describe unusual phenomena occurring with increasing frequency. Priests report that holy water has begun steaming without apparent cause. Several chapels have experienced unexplained failures of their lighting systems, with candles burning in colours that don't correspond to any known flame temperatures. Visitors to St. Peter's Basilica have complained of feeling watched by unseen eyes, and some have reported hearing whispered conversations in Latin coming from areas where no one is standing. The Pope himself has issued private statements to senior church officials, acknowledging that the Vatican is experiencing what he terms spiritual atmospheric disturbances that require careful monitoring and possible intervention by specialists in ecclesiastical security. These statements have not been made available to the public, and Vatican press officials deny any knowledge of unusual activities within church properties. Applications for specialized theological positions are accepted by sealed letter only, and all correspondence becomes the permanent property of the Holy See. Applicants are advised that successful candidates may be required to sign binding agreements that supersede previous religious or civil obligations. The work continues. The harvest approaches completion, and in the depths beneath the eternal city, something ancient and patient counts down the hours until its long imprisonment finally ends.